The G20 Summit kicked off Monday in Los Cabos, Mexico. World leaders are meeting to discuss economic and global issues. The BBC reports the continuing Eurozone crisis is at the top of the list.
They'll face lots of questions about what action they're taking to tackle the continent's debt crisis. But all of the leaders face one common challenge, and that's how to promote economic growth.
Of course, there are lots of ideas on how to promote growth. For instance, a writer for the Wall Street Journal blames structural problems for the crisis and says the G20 should focus on reform. In too many countries, inefficient companies are shielded from market pressures. Wages are too high. Basic infrastructure is lacking. Employment rules and trade union pressure frustrate efforts to change working practices or cut costs. Broken banking systems can't provide working capital or finance viable projects. But a writer for the Economic Times of India says austerity reforms are actually causing the slump, and the G20 should focus on pro-growth stimulus. Most countries cannot afford to borrow limitlessly and stimulate their economies. But the sentiment that is building at the G20 is that recovery from the crisis necessitates state spending and monetary intervention, not as a cookie cutter for all, but in countries that are reeling under unemployment. What's more, while markets briefly breathed a sigh of relief after the Greek elections, an analyst from Bloomberg tells CNN the world still isn't convinced the Eurozone is stable.
Coming out of the G20, what we want to see is that the world gets behind the idea that the voters have prevented Greece from jumping over a cliff.
But Fox News' Stuart Varney points out that commitment comes on the back of bailouts from an increasingly reluctant Germany.
Everybody's putting pressure on the Germans. Please go along with at least an intermediate-term bailout. But the Germans are saying, look, is it worth it?
And if that's not quite pessimistic enough, a writer for The Guardian points out the G20 doesn't have a track record of producing binding agreements. It would be naive to imagine that the G20 is preparing a blueprint for global recovery or that the Eurozone crisis will soon be over. At the moment, the global economy can be divided into nations that are in recession, about to go into recession, or rapidly losing momentum. For the moment, there are no good outcomes, just bad and really bad. The summit will continue Tuesday and will also include discussion on the UN's peace plan for Syria. For Newsy, I'm Megan Murphy. Multiple sources, The Real Story.